Soon after that, global Sikh NGOs such as Khalsa Aid, M. Foundation, that provide humanitarian relief in many disaster-affected countries of the world. So these NGOs, Sikh NGOs, stepped in with dozens of their volunteers coming from Delhi, and even at a later stage, smaller Sikh organizations also were present and contributed. So if I talk more specifically, for example, about the SGPC, so the Sikh, what is usually called the Sikh Parliament, provided paid cooks and management staff. The other organization provided healthcare. Here are two photos of one of the medical camps at Singhu border. Those Sikh organizations, whether small or bigger, provided also shelter in tents, especially for women. They also provided water. Here you have a picture which I took at Singhu border, where you can see a water tank installed by Khalsa Aid. Toilet facilities, hygiene kits were also provided by those various NGOs. And at a much later stage, even financial compensation to the families of the protesters who died at the borders. Finally, NRIs, so those non-resident Indians, those Indians who have migrated abroad, have also contributed through village or unions networks. Let me come now to the Sikh institution and practice that, according to all the participants, has played a pivotal role in enabling and sustaining the Kisan Andolan, the farmers' protest, namely Langar, which translates as community kitchen. And Langar was instrumental both at a practical, material, and symbolic level. So Langar is a term of Sufi origin. It is an institution and a practice that was established by the fifth Guru, aimed at eradicating caste inequalities, because food is prepared in common and served to anyone irrespective of caste, class, or religious affiliation. It was therefore implemented to enforce commensality. Commensality is the practice of eating together, and to break caste taboos. In Sikh doctrine and practice, Langar is one of the main forms of seva. Seva is voluntary service given to the community and to God. So there were two types of langar at the protest sites. The small ones that were managed by each group of protesters coming from the same village. Each village was sending supply. This is what is shown on this photo that I took last year in Tikri, where two farmers are kneading the dough to make chapati for their fellow villagers. And besides those small langar, village-based langar, you also came across very big langar where everyone was eating. And you have an example here on this photo. So those large-scale langar were feeding not only the farmers, but also the local population. So in Tikri and Singhu, the local population mostly comprised laborers employed in small-scale factories, or more exactly unemployed, because because a lot of those small industrial units had to close down during the second lockdown. And in that sense, langar that was provided as part of the Kisan Andolan, as part of the farmers' protest, played a major role in sustaining the local working class population at a time of acute crisis and institution. Besides the farmers, besides the local population, the big langar also served activists and visitors that were coming on a regular basis from Punjab and from Delhi. So, at a very practical level, by feeding hundreds of thousands of protesters for a year, langar very simply allowed the movement to sustain itself. It also served as the backbone of the protest at an organizational level, we can say. Indeed, a very efficient supply chain was organized between the several langar of the protest sites and the villages of Punjab and Haryana, those villages that have been sending not only people but also supply on a daily basis during the whole duration of the protest. So these networks, created through the supply of food, were instrumental in sustaining a massive support for the movement among the population of the two states of Haryana and Punjab. I'd just like to give you a very striking example of a particular village in Haryana where women would milk their cows on alternate days at 4:30 a.m. They would hence collect about 200 liters of milk that would be collected and at the village level and then sent on a pickup truck to one of the big langars in Singhu, and that milk would reach Singhu border and the langars of Singhu border at 9 a.m., so relatively early in the morning. So, besides these practical, logistical, I would say, or material dimensions, langar was also very significant at the symbolic, spiritual and even political levels. Firstly, because it placed food and food production and farming at the center stage of this farmers' movement. Cooking and serving food in abundance to anyone, irrespective of their background, not for profit but to sustain the community, for sure represents a very powerful act, particularly in the current political environment. It also served as a powerful reminder towards the importance of food security. So some recollect some protesters like this young woman I interviewed in Singhu. She's a student activist from Punjab University in Chandigarh, a Punjabi Hindu herself, and I recollect how she insisted on the transformative dimension of cooking, serving and eating food together. She told me how she did seva, so she volunteered for the first time in her life at Singhu in December 2020. She also narrated how serving langar to the farmers is a political act, and how it was through langar that city people like her were made part of the protest. So by feeding locals, visitors, supporters, langar established a very intimate connection and created a sense of community. Another example of the importance of langar for the participants. Let me quote here a farmer who managed for a year one of the very big langar at Singhu. I quote, "Langar was the backbone of the protest. First, it was providing food. Second, it provided physical activity to people cooking and serving. Third, it built relationship. It built a community with a strong attachment that outlived this movement." And ultimately, when langar was also served to the same police force that had lathi-charged the protesters on several occasions, It was also used to highlight the moral superiority of the protesters against an illegitimate and brutal government that used violence on farmers, those very farmers who are feeding the nation. Let me now move to how Sikhism has truly provided a meaning system to the protesters who shared the same set of values, beliefs, and moral standards that were seen as threatened by the laws. Those laws were called the Kala Kanun, the black laws. In that sense, the farmers' protest represents a truly fascinating case study where religion provides a potent language of resistance when the social, political, economic context is perceived as violating the moral standards and fundamental values it advocates. So what are those values and ethical norms that were perceived as under threat by the protesters? First, let me maybe start by emphasizing the sanctity of manual labor, particularly of farming, which was advocated by Guru Nanak, the first Guru, in opposition with the way it is traditionally devalued in the Hindu caste system because considered as ritually impure. So this sanctity of manual labor is, for instance, very powerfully reflected in the following saying of Guru Nanak that encapsulate what is usually considered as the three core tenets of Sikhism. So Nam Japo, Kirat Karo, Van Chako. Recite the name of God, pray. Do your work, and this is what I wanted to highlight here. Sikh work ethics values hard physical, particularly farming and honest work. And the third tenet, share your earnings. So the sanctity of farming in Sikh doctrine has obviously inspired the protesters. The movement was, in effect, understood as a life and death fight, so in Punjabi, ond di larai, a fight for existence, because the laws were perceived as an attack, and the term of slow poison was often used by the farmers. So an attack or a slow poison on zameen, land, to which the farmer is related with a most sacred bond. There are several metaphors about land as the mother of the farmer. So a threat to zameen, a threat also to zamir, which translates as conscience, as a set of values, a threat on dharam, which translates normally as religion, but dharam is much broader than the Western notion of religion and reflects a set of values and ethical norms. And finally, an attack on a whole lifestyle based on farming. So the protesters I interviewed perceived farming and land as the sustainer of religion. They insisted on the symbiotic relation between farming, Sikh identity, and the ecosystem of the entire region. So to give you an example of that symbiotic relation, Sikh institutions, particularly Gurdwara, depend on dasvant. Dasvant is 10% of one's income, of one's earning, which is mandated to be donated to the Gurdwara or to any Sikh charity. And because Punjab is a rural state, dasvant actually mostly comes from the farmer's income. So, zamir, conscience, dharam, religion, in the sense of a set of values and ethical norms, define in Sikh universe what is right, just, and honorable. And both zamir and dharam were seen as violated by unjust, even immoral laws passed by an oppressive government. Hence, those laws were completely unacceptable, and therefore dissent became a duty, a moral obligation, and dissent, protests were framed as an act of responsibility, which translates as jimedari. So the protesters, the farmers, felt a strong sense of responsibility at several levels. First, they felt a duty to the living, to their own family, particularly to the younger generation, but also to the Pant, which is the term referring to the Sikh community, a duty to their region, the Punjab, and more broadly, a duty to the whole nation. What was very prevalent among the protesters was the sense of being watched by the whole nation and even by the international community. Let me emphasize their sense of responsibility towards the youth. For example, many of the farmers stressed the exemplarity of the struggle for the Sikh and Punjabi youth in general, including in the diaspora. They emphasized their sense that they were making history, and particularly making history for the next generation. Let me quote here Satinder Sati, a famous Punjabi artist and TV anchor, who gave a very eloquent and even elated speech on the stage of Tikri border at the end of November 2021 to celebrate the victory of the farmers and the repeal of the laws. Here is what she said. Earlier, our children used to say, "Switch on the TV, we want to watch Spider-Man." Do you agree with me or not? This agitation has taught us to tell them the stories of our heroes. Through this agitation, God has sown a seed so that our next generation does not forget our values, and it is the moral responsibility of everyone present here to make sure that the seeds turns into a tree. And finally, the farmers felt an equally strong sense of responsibility to the dead, the shaheeds, so the martyrs and heroes of the past, and also the martyrs of the movement. Indeed, more than 700 protesters, particularly old farmers, died during the protest of heart attacks, of cold and extreme heat, and of accidents. So here on those photos, you have two posters which I took, photos which I took at Tikri border, representing shaheeds, so martyrs of the past and of the present. Let me now discuss how Sikh history and collective memory have been a constant source of inspiration for the protesters. The notion of collective memory, as theorized by Maurice Alvar and others after him, refers to how a community, a group, remembers its past, what a group decides to remember, and what it chooses to forget is instrumental in shaping its identity. So in Sikh self-representation, the history of the community is understood as a long rai, a long fight for survival, a fight for the preservation of its identity, a fight for self-respect and against oppression and injustice. Sikh collective memory is punctuated by tragic events whose memory is kept alive and institutionalized through sacred texts, Gurbani, and their recitation, rituals such as Ardas, the evening collective prayer that I already told you about, sacred monuments such as historical Gurdwara associated with the Gurus, visual representations of martyrs and heroes. So there are two historical periods that have left an indelible mark on Sikh collective memory. The confrontation with the Mughals in the 17th and 18th century, a time of persecution where Sikhs were fighting for their survival. The Sikh martial ethos and martyrdom tradition stem from these challenges. And more recently, the traumatic events in 1984 with Blue Star operation, during which the Indian army desecrated the Harmandir Sahib, the earliest Sikh shrine located in Amritsar, killed hundreds of civilians in an attempt to flush out armed militants. And in the same year, 1984, in November, the anti-Sikh pogroms in Delhi following Indira Gandhi's assassination by her Sikh bodyguards. So there is this very strong perception that Punjab and the Sikhs in particular have throughout their history waged a struggle to uphold fundamental values, a struggle against injustice and oppressive rulers in Delhi. So the Kisan Andolan was experienced, the farmers' movement was experienced by its participants as one decisive battle in that continuous fight waged by the Sikhs and by Punjab.